animation alone, there are inferior films. Films.
Sequels suck. Sequels suck. Sequels suck.
Welcome back, movie fans. This is Sequel Suck, the podcast that loves to talk all things podcasts. Fucked it up. It has been a while. Leave it in. It doesn't matter. The podcast that loves to talk all things sequels, prequels, and remakes. My name is Angus Brown, and sitting opposite me virtually on the screen is
Cable Sage. How are you?
Bloody good to see you, mate. How's it going?
Yeah, likewise, and I love the Halloween 2 shirt.
Buddy, it's Halloween time. It's a sequel, just representing our brand.
Yeah, and I think it feels not that long ago we were talking about most of the Halloween sequels, and that was like this time last year.
Yeah, I know. It's shot by. It's it's good, but it's good. It's good to be back in the seat back. But we've had a little hiatus for a little bit. We probably, I mean, I was just looking about it earlier today. I think we probably picked the worst time of the worst year to take a hiatus if you're a sequels podcast, because there's been a few sequels that have come out so far this year.
Yeah.
Just a couple that shot by while we were sitting on our butts, not doing our sequel podcast. We had Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, probably big in the sense that like it was a big sort of death bell for the Marvel craze. That was the movie that made everyone go, I think we're done. And Marvel has been in trouble since. Magic Mike's Last Dance, Murder Mystery 2, John Wick Chapter 4. Fuck yes, John Wick Chapter 4. That film's incredible. What else we got? We had Creed 3. We had Evil Dead Rise. We had Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which, oh boy, did they underestimate the impact of Barbenheimer when they scheduled the release of that movie. That is one of the all-time absolute cock-ups. Fast X, Book Club, The Next Chapter, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. We had another Indiana Jones movie come out, Extraction 2, Transformers, Rise of the Beast, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, a huge film that I've been waiting for ages, Insidious, The Red Door, there's more Insidious, Meg 2, The Trench, Saw X, we're still getting Saw movies in 2023, Paw Patrol, the Mighty movie. All the parents out there, my apologies.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I dodged a bullet. I sent my kids with the grandparents for that one and got out of it. The Nun 2, The Equalizer 3, The Exorcist Believer. Speaking of Halloween, David Gordon Green back on his reboot rant that he's doing, and that's in cinemas right now. There has been a slew of sequels that shot by while we were taking our little break. We're not talking about any of them today.
Well, it's funny. You were the one that brought it up, and it was probably good that you reeled off some of these sequels that we could talk about and we want to talk about. I'm sure there's a few in there that we definitely want to talk about. Indiana Jones, maybe Saw, I guess Saw as a franchise, Mission Impossible, John Wick. There's definitely some ones you want to talk about. But the funniest thing, the Mighty Pups or the Paw Patrol 2 movie is really funny because it's kind of a remake of a pre-existing thing they did with Nickelodeon about 5-6 years ago. Sadly, I do know this because my kids loved that original movie, and then they obviously made a newer, big budget version of that and just tweaked it a little bit. But
well, I think you and I both got scammed by that original one because that got released in cinemas, Paw Patrol Mighty Pups, as like it's a Mighty Pups Paw Patrol movie. And you've got kids, we both took our kids to the cinema to see it.
Yeah,
it wasn't a movie, it was a 40-minute episode of the show, and they charged full price for tickets. And I think this is like in 2017. I'm still angry about it.
You're right.
Still rageful that they vacuumed that money out of my pocket for an episode of TV on the big screen. I mean, my kids loved it, but when it finished, I was like, what the hell's going on? Yeah. We just sat down. What are we doing?
Yeah,
so I know. Back to get the money again. Thanks, Paw Patrol.
Totally agree. They know how to get your money, and then they repackage more and more toys. I think it's just the way it is. I think we, as kids, got affected by it with Transformers. They made a Transformers movie and killed off all the main characters and reintroduced new ones so they had more toys. And that's what Paw Patrol are doing. Very, very smart marketing.
they're killing off the. Did they kill off
Was-
Chase? That would
No,
be
no,
wild.
sorry. I shouldn't say that. They introduced the odd new character, but they can repackage the toys for the movie. This is now not just the Paw Patrol, it's the Mighty Pups version of Paw Patrol. And now you have to buy this tower, and you've got to buy this vehicle, and you've got to buy this version of Chase and Sky and what have you. Anyway, let's talk about the movie we actually randomly decided to talk about because it definitely wasn't on our list.
No, it was just
Because-
pure coincidence because we, like I said, we've been on hiatus for a couple of months now from the show, and we've just been checking in and watching our movies and going through our business. It's October as we're recording, and as we want to do around the Sequels Suck hauls, we all love jumping on board 31 days, 31 films in 31 days, 31 horror films. And it's a fun little challenge we set ourselves, trying to see if we can get through it. There's a couple of rules we throw around. You can check out the Sequel Suck socials if you want to see what they are and jump in. It's not too late. If you can pound away 4 films a day, you can catch up pretty quick. But by pure coincidence, without any conversation, we both watched The Shining and then the film we're talking about today, Dr. Sleep. I think like one day. I think you're one day ahead of me.
Yeah.
And just out of pure nowhere. And we talked about the fact that, we've jumped in on watching these movies. And that just seemed like as good a reason as any to get back on the mics and start talking some sequels. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, fuck, I don't know how we overlooked Dr. Sleep as one to talk about to begin with. Because it's, in terms of like sequels and the stories behind them and the stories behind the original and how they come up, like this is a big one.
Yeah, I think
30 sequel.
I can't believe it sort of passes by, but I'll be frank and honest. I understand The Shining and its legacy in film history. For me, it's not one that I've rewatched a lot. And the crazy thing was, the first time I would have seen it would have been late teens. And even then, I'm really skeptical whether I even had seen the whole thing. Because when I sat down and watched, I watched it in 4K. I was all excited because it's so part of pop culture. And it's especially a lot of the Here's Johnny and the Jack Nicholson stuff. And so many parts of that movie are so either being parodied or copied, but also just come up in best of videos and all that sort of stuff. There's so much of that film that I feel like I've seen that when I went and sat down and watched it, I'm like, oh my God, there's like at least 1/3 of the film towards the start that I'm like, I cannot recall a single shot. Like there's little bits like with him on his bike going through the halls of the hotel and over the mat and the sound, obviously then when he goes over the wood and all that. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I remember that, but there's certain aspects of that, a lot of the early part of the film I can't remember. So the only thing I can think of is, because I remember the place I watched it the first time. It was a friend's place. We're in Northcote. We're all into movies. We're studying cinema at La Trobe University. And the only thing I can think of is we've put it on DVD or VHS, whatever we had at the time. And I must have stepped out to get beers or something because I definitely, like everyone remembers the opening, the winding car up the hill all the way to Colorado, all that sort of stuff. But there's definitely a chunk I'm like, this is the first time I've seen this. But then once it starts to kick into gear, like everything beyond that, I remember like it was yesterday. So I don't know. I feel like I must have never watched the whole film and thought I had because, weirdly, I reckon there's 40 minutes at the start, roughly 40 minutes at the start that I like can't recall at all. But anyway.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was crazy. So it was good to actually watch both of these movies pretty much back to back and firstly get the refresher because I'm like, I've got to watch The Shining again and then watch Dr. Sleep because I was definitely curious to go back to watch, I guess, a sequel that and we've talked about some sequels that have had a big gap between the first movie and the second movie, and this is one of those ones that's sort of in that same sort of ballpark. You know, you're looking at 39 years difference, 1980 to 2019. So, and then there's that extra layer, like you did talk about. There's that extra layer of, at the end of the day, they are both Stephen King novels. This is not like Dr. Sleep was just a completely random Warner Brothers sequel to The Shining. This is still Stephen King's follow-up work of The Shining. So anyway, I'll let you talk.
Well, it's a strange one. Like, you touched on some really good points there about the fact that the first one, even if, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of people who maybe have watched The Shining once or twice or never, but have seen, I don't know, The Simpsons or clips, you know, interspersed other stuff, or, you know, it's one of those movies that gets shown in the background of a lot of other movies. I think like
Yes.
Twister, like it's on the screen in Twister when the Twister hits and stuff. You know, it's kind of around, so you know of it because it is so impactful. And the sequel, it sort of feels like a sequel that shouldn't have happened. Like the Shining feels like one of those untouchable films of that era where you're like, there's no way you could ever make a sequel to that movie. Why would you? Weirdly, it kind of is one of the films that are, you know, in those untouchables that does lend itself to a sequel so much, because yeah, like the protagonist dies at the end of the movie, spoilers, but Jack Torrance dies, but that little kid he lives, and he is going to be fucked up for life. So it doesn't surprise me that King did come back and write a sequel, which is exactly what happened. He wrote the novel. He always wanted to, you know, follow up what happened to Danny Torrance. He's always curious. And also there's that sort of subtext of it is the first book, The Shining, the Stephen King book of The Shining, was written when he was a full-on alcoholic, but realizing he was a full-on alcoholic, and it was kind of written about a father afraid of what he could do to his kids. And that's why Jack Torrance is an alcoholic, and that's why he hurts Danny when he's drunk. And there was a lot of Stephen King's fears about what he was becoming. So he got clean and sober and hasn't drunk in, I think he said something like 30 years he's been sober. So, you know, quite a while. Then he wanted to write about what the other side of that was. What does, you know, being clean look like? And he thought he'd take Danny Torrance and do it. So we get Dan Torrance as an adult doing that, dealing with all of the freaking trauma of being a small child in the Overlook Hotel when the ghosts and then the entities, whatever, they come out, and when Jack Torrance tries to kill you. So it exists. But the fun thing about it is this movie is a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and it's a sequel to Stephen King's The Shining. And if people out there are confused by that, if anyone's ever read the book of The Shining, which you really should, you'll find those two things are very different. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is not Stephen King's The Shining. It's very, very different. The characters, the story, the way it all plays out, huge changes. And famously, Stephen King did not like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Said it felt really cold, and it was such a personal story for Stephen King. He didn't like how cold and distant it is, and there's lots of elements that were taken out. There's walking hedge like animals that come to life. There's lots of extra scenes, you know, where you kind of feel a bit sorry for Jack Torrance. He's a much more you feel much more empathetic towards the character throughout the book, and you kind of like, oh, this is a really tragic thing that's happening to him. He's being possessed by this force. He doesn't want to be this way. It's kind of making him this way, which of course is an allegory for the booze. But the big change is at the end of the book, Jack Torrance actually fights back against the Overlook Hotel, and the whole way through the book, there's a big thing about he has to let the pressure off the boilers in the basement, and he's been getting crazy and he's been forgetting, and the hotel doesn't realize he's been forgetting, and then in the end he remembers he's forgotten, so he goes in and he like sabotages the valves and blows up the hotel. So at the end of the Shining, the novel, Jack Torrance blows up the Overlook Hotel, and also he does not kill Dick O'Halloran. So two huge things at the end of The Shining that come into play in Dr. Sleep are that Dick O'Halloran is still alive at the start of the book, and the Overlook Hotel is completely destroyed and gone. It's a campground now. There's no hotel. So it's a really fun place to start, because now you've got everyone who's going to see the movie Dr. Sleep is probably fans of the film The Shining.
Yes.
Which is certainly what I wanted. Like I didn't want to come in and watch a sequel to the book. I wanted to watch a sequel to the movie. Have you read the novel? Have you read either of them?
No, well, see, and then that's probably my little bit of a flaw in my, I guess, when I come to analyze both these films, is I'm not privy to the books. I just know I was very aware of Stephen King's dislike of Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining, to the point where I remember the actual telemovie that got remade, The Shining, which was
called Stephen King's The Shining,
which was close to the book. And that's where I kind of think maybe I got confused. So I remember seeing that as a kid too, and that was over the two nights what we normally get here in Australia. It used to be the Sunday and the Monday night. I remember watching that too. So some of that's vague to me, but I feel like that's mashed in with the original Shining, the movie as well, thinking I'd more seen it than I hadn't. So, but yeah, it is an interesting, like you said, there's obviously obvious differences from Stephen King's The Shining book to the Stanley Kubrick version, and then where this sort of leads into him writing a book, which obviously I'm assuming he's written Doctor Sleep as a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's movie. Is that right?
The Doctor Sleep book is a sequel to Stephen King's Shining book. So in his book, Dick O'Halloran is alive at the start. The Overlook is gone. And what that means, and again, obviously, as always, spoiler city. So the changes that we get at the start of Doctor Sleep when Dick O'Halloran is there as a ghost, those scenes are exactly the same as they are in the book. It's just at the end of the scene when Wendy comes running to find Danny, Dick isn't there because he's a ghost. And the end of the film, Doctor Sleep, they obviously go back to the Overlook, but at the end of the book, they can't. It's not there. There's a campground.
Yep.
So that doesn't happen. So what Mike Flanagan, the director, tried to do when he talked to Stephen King about this is he was like, okay, the movie is a sequel to the movie, obviously, because I can't ignore The Shining. If I'm making a sequel to The Shining, people won't have it. But what I can do is kind of fix something that's been bothering you for 39 years.
Yeah, and retroactive.
So the end of The Shining movie is not the ending of the Shining book. The end of the Doctor Sleep movie is not the end of the Doctor Sleep book, but the end of the Doctor Sleep movie is the end of the Shining book. Right. So he's kind of crossed over to tie things together. I think, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, I think that leads to some problems with this film. And I think perhaps he was trying to do it all at once. And some things kind of fall apart.
Right.
Which is how I feel a little bit with a lot of this movie. Something else that's worth noting right out of the gate is there are two versions of this movie. There is the theatrical release, which is 2.5 hours, which was met. I think it kind of got a bit of ho-hum. You know, the people who like it love it and will say things like, it's the best horror film in 39 years. I think that's a bit crazy. Then there are people who watched it and are like, this is a boring piece of shit. What the fuck are we doing? After that film came out, the Warner Brothers studio was like, here's a whole bunch more money, Mike Flanagan, go and make your director's cut, which he did. The director's cut is 30 minutes longer. It's a 3-hour movie, the director's cut. That's what I watched. Is that what you watched?
Yes, correct.
So a couple of changes that he made from that is he changes the start. He changes the cuts. So in Kubrick's The Shining, a lot of the cuts are crossfades. Kubrick really liked having that slow crossfade effect. So Flanagan wanted to do that. The studio said no. Then he director's cut, in-come crossfades. The other big change is he puts in chapter headings.
Yep.
So things like that Kubrick did, you know, when it's like each section has its own title.
Yep.
And Flanagan wasn't allowed to do that in a theatrical release, and then a director's cut. They're like, go fucking crazy, and he did. So it has a much more defined entity to it. That's where the first of my kind of uh-ohs come into it for me. I don't know how did you feel about the sort of the title cards coming in and the chapterizing of this film?
For me, it didn't bother me a lot because, as we spoke offline, I couldn't watch it all in the whole 3 hours in one hit, just due to life. So sometimes having the chapter heading was that's a good stopping point.
That's what I'm up to.
Where I've got to get back to doing life things. So it didn't bother me that much, and because I hadn't seen the theatrical cut and not knowing they weren't there originally, I felt like it just felt like The Shining, where The Shining had their chapters as well, or their sections. So it didn't bother me too much. Is that controversial? No.
I don't think it's controversial at all. I'm just curious because I have So my history of Doctor Sleep is like shaky as shit. I love the book and the film.
Yeah, okay.
The Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is one of my top 4 films ever. I think.
Mm.
Like I fucking love that movie.
Mm.
And then the sequel, when they announced, I was really excited. So I went and got the book. I didn't finish the book. I got really put off by it. The mysticism and the stuff. It's not as intense. The stuff with the True Knot and Rosie the Hat and all that in the film is not kind of that over the top. But in the book, it's like it's a fantasy novel almost at times, talking about like what they are, and they're kind of pitched, I guess, sort of like energy vampires in a way.
Yeah. Well,
in the blurb of the book and then the idea, but when the actual practice of the novel, it's really far more like mystical and fantasy, which is not my bag, and that's not.
That was what I was going to ask you. Is that when I was watching it without reading the book, and I'm like, oh, I like this whole, True Knot kind of thing, but I was kind of like, are these kind of different? Aren't they just pretty much vampires, but a slightly different version of a vampire? Like they're not sucking blood, but they're sucking almost the steam and almost the soul out of somebody, and that's their sustenance to keep living almost immortally. Yeah, I just thought that was sort of an interesting take, or a bit of a spin on almost like the vampire thing. But I was like, what are they actually? I'm not too sure. It was sort of, yeah.
Yeah, and it's well, I mean, I don't know if they explain it towards the end of the book. They don't really go into huge detail in the novel, which is, I mean, good. Don't over-explain stuff. That's the first way to kill it. But there is this idea that they've been around forever. They all kind of have, to be one of the True Knot, you've got to have some kind of power, like we see with the Viper, the young girl, Andy, Snakebite Andy, that's what they call it. How she can push people, she can convince people to do stuff just by talking to them. And obviously, Rosie has some kind of telekinetic power, and Crawdaddy, or Crowdaddy, whatever they call him, has some kind of extrasensory thing where he can find things and people, whatever. They all have their own like thing that then is enhanced by steam, and that's why they can see it. And it gets a bit convoluted, but there is this suggestion that there is lots of them and they've been around for eternity. And they talk about the end of the movie, when the old guy is dying. She's like, you've seen kings and
you've seen empires rise and fall.
You've been around forever. You are eternal, sort of thing. They also, though, are kind of piss weak. Like there is the suggestion that the True Knot that we're seeing is not its full form, and they're a bit weak because they're not getting as much steam. But then at the end, Rosie like sucks up all the fucking steam, and she still gets the shit kicked out of her really easily by just a dude. Like it's not that final fight. It's sort of a bit anticlimactic because even before Danny lets out the ghosts of the Overlook, like he's not totally getting messed up. Like he's not winning by the time he lets them out, but he's also not losing badly. It's a pretty even fight, and he fucks her up pretty hard at the start before she turns the tables a bit. So this idea that they are superpowered beings, I don't know if the idea is meant to be like, oh, it's all hubris and they're not as strong as they think they are, or if it's like, haha, look how strong they are, and you're like, what? These guys fell to pieces so quickly. But I found the chapterization a bit frustrating because Mike Flanagan is, I think he's a good director. I think he's a horror nerd who has found a way to like go in and make some good stuff. He's made a few films, but if you are hearing the name right now and you're not quite sure why you know it, but you've heard it before, the reason you probably heard Mike Flanagan's name is because he's a big Netflix guy, and he remade The Haunting of Hill House into that sort of 10-episode series, and then he made Haunting of Bly Manor, and he made Midnight Mass, and he made The Midnight Club, and he is ostensibly a TV guy, kind of like that's where he excels, is long form storytelling, multiple story threads, dragging stuff out. Sometimes I think to his detriment. I think he can get a little bit slow, but overall, I think that's his wheelhouse. Is like, let's take this story and stretch it out. I think if he had his way, he probably would have made Doctor Sleep like a 10-episode series and done it really, really, really long.
Glad you brought that up, because I don't want to peep too much behind the curtain, and don't want to throw you under the bus too much, but the first time you sat down to watch this, did you fall asleep or were you
The
bored?
first time I watched Doctor Sleep, I sat down. I didn't see it at the cinema. I sat down and I rented it at home, and I sat down and watched the theatrical cut. And I started to fall asleep about an hour and a half in. And then like it was like, I'll finish it tomorrow. And the next day I went to put it on and I was like, why? And I just didn't. And so I didn't finish it. And this is the first time I've ever wanted to go back to it. And it's because I thought, well, maybe this is a case where the theatrical cut just isn't the version. It's not the one. It's like what he was forced to do. And the director's cut is the one. And I definitely think the director's cut is infinitely better than theatrical cut.
Okay.
I'm really happy with the changes he made. I'm really happy to spend that extra half an hour in this world because overall, I think this is a pretty fun world to run around in. Like, yes, I have some questions about the True Knot. Yes, I have some questions about how they play out Abra, the young girl who's the protagonist in this, and Danny as an adult, and some of the directions they take it. I'm like, what the? And some scenes I'm like, cut this and put in something different, please. But overall, I thought it was a pretty good ride. And one of the things I like about Mike Flanagan, one of my favorite things about Mike Flanagan is his association with the Newton brothers, who do the scores to almost everything he does. And the Newton brothers make incredible scores. And what they do in like taking the original Shining score and remixing it and contextualizing it into this film is breathtaking. As someone who is a big film score nerd, I'm really blown away by that. And so that made me want to keep watching.
I'll come back to the score, but when you had sort of said that you'd sort of struggled with theatrical, I was kind of like, oh geez, well, how's this going to go? But I put it on, and it was, again, I had the benefit of, I took breaks because I actually couldn't sit down for the 3 hours, again, due to life happening around me. But it was one of the, once I put it on, I was very invested in that, well, in the movie, but also, it is a bit of a slow burn, that first 45 minutes, as it starts the world build for us again. And I guess we have to see Danny's, the after effects as a kid, the, PTSD, the trauma of everything that happened, and then him being an alcoholic and being in a really low place in life. So there is that sort of slow build, and then we start to have the intertwining characters, obviously Rose the Hat, and then Abra, but I was very much invested, and then once you sort of get to that hour mark or just past the hour mark, then things start to come together and starts to click into gear. I didn't want to turn it off. So, it was one of those films that, 3 hour runtime, sounds like a long time, but I could have easily sat down there and watched that.
The story's there. Like, it earns a 3 hour runtime without a doubt. The story is 100% there. The storytelling is really solid. Flanagan is really good at like taking the key elements of this story and highlighting them. I think that part of my issue with the way, like, I'm all for chapterizing things. I love it. Like, I love it when a film just puts like, bam, the Bonnie problem. Like, oh fuck, what's the Bonnie problem? And then you just watch. Tarantino used to do it, and it was really fun. And you see it in the films a lot in the 90s. They were big fans of doing it in 90s indie cinema, and that's probably why I like it so much. With this one, it didn't feel like we were getting chapter headings. It felt like we were getting episode titles. It felt like it was, this is episode 1, this is episode 2, this is episode 3. And he was really leaning into his television sort of pedigree there. And that's how he knew how to tell this story. And that's, look, for some people, that's probably great. And I think maybe it's even a little bit smart given the current climate of how people watch films. And maybe especially because I watched The Shining the night before. The Shining does have section headings, but The Shining is so propulsive and so interesting. Like, the first 40 minutes, not a lot happens in The Shining, but you cannot look away. Like, that film grabs you and refuses to let you go. And I was sat in front of the TV watching a movie I've seen, I don't know, 20 times before, and I was watching it at like 11 o'clock at night at the end of a very long day where I could have just like, zoned out a bit or dumped. I phoned down, like, just staring at it, no mucking about. Didn't even get up to like get an extra beer halfway through. I was like, I'm just watching a fucking movie. And I didn't even realize I was doing it. Whereas with Dr. Sleep, every time a chapter heading came up, I was like, oh, is this a piss break? Is this a, get another beer? Is this a think about, are we going to finish this movie tomorrow? Okay, maybe I'll just check, I'll check my messages. Oh, yeah, I'll have a quick, I'll pop in on the group chat. And it's not because the movie is bad. It's not because it's boring. It's not because I wasn't enjoying it, but it really lent itself to this idea that, hey, you don't have to be 100% in this movie the whole time. You can check out a little bit and you'll be okay. You won't miss anything. And it also leans so hard on the fact that it is a Shining sequel. There's lots of shot for shot redos. He chooses not to use footage from the original Shining, but reshoot and recast. So you get a new actor playing Wendy, but she's not playing Wendy. She's playing Shelley Duvall's Wendy.
Yes.
Like it is that. And she's doing every move, every, the intonation, the speech pattern, the pauses she takes, and that actor does an incredible job of doing those things. So that when it does match with the flashbacks of her and Danny after the Outlook, Overlook, but not stuff that happened in the original movie, you do completely buy into that being the exact same character. And the little kid actor who plays young Danny Torrance, I think does a great job as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you're like being reminded, you're being hit over the head like, hey, this is a Shining sequel. Remember this scene? Remember this scene? Remember this scene? What inevitably winds up happening is going, I do remember it, and The Shining is better. And The Shining is a better movie, a more interesting movie. It's also, it has that problem. And again, this is not Mike Flanagan's fault. This is just the way it is. But it has that problem of looking too clean. Like everything is shot digitally now. So you look at the shots of Danny riding the bike that is exactly the same when he's riding around the Overlook. You're like, this is too clean. This looks fake. This looks like a remake of The Shining. Whereas The Shining, no matter how 4K you get it, it has that graininess to it that is unmistakably film. How did you find the shot for shot sort of redo stuff? Did that, as someone who hasn't grown up being obsessed with The Shining, was that like, oh,
cool. I thought, I was not too sure. It made sense. It was obviously the shot where Danny puts his head through the split wood door, where it was like, here's Johnny, and you have Wendy on the other side. I don't even know why. I actually thought they would use the stock footage from The Shining, but it made sense. Well, they've already introduced us to the recast version of Wendy, and like you said, she nails it. Like, she's not exactly perfect to Shelley Duvall, but she's again, the mannerisms, she does a very good job, the accent, everything, to be very Wendy-like. That you go, well, that makes sense. Because this is the thing. This is the other thing that I would say going into this movie that I wasn't sure if they would even use too much stuff from The Shining or whether they would use stock footage. I went in blind. I had seen a trailer, back in 2019 when it was coming out, and I hadn't been spoiled, but I wasn't too sure if they were going to use any of that stuff. I didn't know if they're going to recast. I didn't know if they were going to de-age. I had no idea what they're going to do. So I was interested, and I was pleasantly surprised that they obviously found someone that looked enough like Shelley Duvall, sort of ish, but acted the house down to replicate that performance. And then the same thing that blew me away, they had Henry Thomas. Elliot from E.T. was playing the Jack Torrance character in the bar, and that I didn't even pick it till they had the front. I think he was in the bathroom cleaning up Ewan McGregor, and when you got the front on look of his face, I'm like, oh my god, that's Henry. It's like, what the, that was a crazy thing. I don't know. It was kind of cool that they just said, look, let's recast and get people close enough to these actors in looks, and hopefully they can get the mannerisms down and all that sort of stuff to feel as seamless as possible. Yeah, but like I said, I had no idea what they were going to do, whether they were going to lean on, again, like stock footage, or whether they were totally going to be clean and not even have those characters in this movie. I wasn't too sure where they were going to go with that. So it was a bit of a surprise for me going in because I had no idea.
I think Henry Thomas had an impossible task in this.
100%.
And I think it really went to highlight something that I think most people know, but like there is only one Jack Nicholson and watching someone not try to do Jack Torrance, but try to do Jack Nicholson doing Jack Torrance. He did as good as I guess anyone could do, but he really I can't remember the name, but the actress who played Shelley Duvall playing Wendy, I think did a really good job. I think Henry Thomas playing Jack Nicholson playing Jack Torrance, just like he got his ass kicked by that role because what are you gonna do, man? And you could see in scenes he was trying not to lean too hard into being Jack, because Jack Nicholson is such an imitatable character that people have their impressions of Jack Nicholson. He's a character unto himself, and you could see him not doing it. But I was watching him like, you should just go full Jack. Like if you were doing Jack Nicholson right now, because Jack Nicholson is just doing Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance. There's really not a lot of separation going on there. Yeah. I think they would have really been a lot better.
I did. There was a part of me that thought, I agree with you. You got to lean into it, because I think at this point, Jack Nicholson has a particular look that Henry Thomas, even though they did the haircut, I think they made him.
They nailed the haircut. Wow, did they nail the haircut?
Well, I think they nailed it enough that we knew who is supposed to be in the movie, but the problem is he doesn't have enough of those particular facial features to be the same unless they had to put prosthetics on him. And then, like you said, I think he has to lean in harder to effectively do a Jack Nicholson impression, which brings me to the point, did we need to have that in there? I know he had to I feel like, I like the whole him fighting against the whole his dad, and he didn't want to be like his dad, or he was like his dad, all that sort of stuff, and I love the whole conversation. I think it's important for the film, but I wonder if they could have done it in such a way that we didn't even. I don't know. Was there a way to?
Well, I wonder if they did the thing where get a standing, basically, have someone, with the hair exactly the same, the posture, the build, but never show his face, and then get someone who just get a voice actor who can just fucking nail a Jack Nicholson impression. Yeah. So you never see Jack Torrance's face, but you hear the voice, and the voice is a perfect mimic of, Jack Nicholson at that age. I think they would have had a way better effect than trying to suck us into scenes. Because they don't show his face for quite a while in the scene, and I was like, "Oh, good."
Or it's a bit on the side, so you go, "It's not." We know it's not him, but you can't.
But when they do the shot, the first time you see him fully, you see him front on. There he is. It's Jack Torrance. And it's like, oh, but it's not. It's not Jack Torrance. That's a guy who we're meant to think is him, but it's not. So yeah, I do kind of wish. And I think it would have served the story really well to never see, Jack Torrance's face, because, what the fuck is Danny going to remember of how his dad looks? He's 8? Is that it? 7? Something like that when he's in the.
Well, he says 5, and I'm like, that can't be right. I'm sure that was the one thing I actually did. Did I write that down? Because I was like, hang on, that doesn't make sense. I think Ewan McGregor's age, I think it makes sense if he's 5, but he does say he was 5 when his dad died. When he gets up on his 8th anniversary of being sober, he talks about his dad and he reflects back on his dad. And I love that scene as well. But then he says his dad had died when he was 5, and I was kind of like, 5? That kid's that's closer to 6, 7 at least, if not 7. And I was like, 5, that's really young. I like that. Your memories would have been really well and truly faded by that point.
Yeah. And also, he would have blocked out a lot of stuff. And yeah, this is nitpicking, but I think you could have just not shown the face. Also, something that, and this is just reminding me of something.
Sorry, can I just sort of just backtrack over that a little bit? Look, like I said, it was an impossible ask, even for Henry Thomas, if they say don't overact, don't over Jack Nicholson it would be hard not to, and it's that fine line of what do you do? And I think it's hard because all the other actors that were recast, I think, did very good jobs. I know,
the guy who played Dick O'Halloran did a great job.
Exactly, but you watch them back to back. That's not the original actors. They haven't been. It's the original actor de-aged or anything like that. We know that they've recast, but I still think Jack Torrance, aka Jack Nicholson, is such a big character it was kind of the one that I think anyone's going to pick through anyway, if that makes sense. Like
Absolutely.
it was a hard ass. I mean, like he's such a dynamic figure in cinema history that it's like, how do you replicate that without not not stacking up? So I think it's a bit like we always go back to it, but the Jaws thing of maybe less was more. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that definitely would have worked well on this if we, don't show the shark, man.
Mm.
Just give us his voice, and I think it would have been creepier too to like never see the face.
And even then, like, could Jack
becomes this
Nicholson even
looming entity instead of just a guy?
I'm sure it's a cost thing too, but surely couldn't have Jack even done his voice a little bit, or could they have used some stock audio from the original movie? I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, look, he's one of the most,
And like you said,
easily
imitatable.
imitated voice. So I think it would have been so easy to get a voice actor, get D. Bradley Baker or someone, or get someone who's like a career voice actor, Frank Welker, anyone who can do that kind of stuff, and just be like, hey, we just want you to come in and be Jack Nicholson, in this voiceover. I something that I noticed when I was watching the movie this time that I really thought was going to be important at the end because of reading the book, is something that I forgot how important it was in The Shining, just because there's so much going on in that movie. It's so easy to forget little bits, but I forgot how important, little Danny Torrance. I looked it up. He is 5. He's a 5-year-old. So little Danny Torrance, he's up there by himself with no one except his parents and his imaginary friend Tony.
Oh, Tony, fat Tony.
Sidebar, one of the creepiest things ever, like a little kid's like, I'm Tony. And that little thing, which the actor who played Danny in The Shining just did in the audition. No one asked him to do that. He just held up his finger and wiggled his finger and put on that voice. And they're like, that's fucked up. You're in. But what we find out in the book, Dr. Sleep, Tony, Danny Torrance, and they say this in The Shining, Danny Torrance's name is Daniel Anthony Torrance. Tony is Danny from the future coming back to help him survive The Shining. It's a weird, crazy thing they put into Dr. Sleep. But yeah, like grown up Danny is Tony. It's like he calls himself Tony so he doesn't freak Danny out at 5 being like, I'm you from the future. But that's who Tony is. It's grown up Danny Torrance. And they didn't put that in the movie at all. They put in all this other nonsense that we didn't need. And I thought that was a huge thing to get rid of. But it's something that I always thought must be at the end of the movie, and I just didn't see it, or must be in the director's cut, and they just didn't have time to put it in. No, 3 hours, and they don't cover that huge revelation about who the fuck Tony is. And they even talk about Tony in this one and don't explain it.
Do you think, and this is to sort of compare the two films, and you are I'll say you're the Shining aficionado, and seeing you've read the books and you've obviously watched the movie. For me, being the more, let's just say the newcomer to the franchise or to the movies, does The Shining really show Danny enough? Like, I feel like Dr. Sleep, we get to really know Danny and the whole idea of having the shine. But I feel like in The Shining, we don't see, I don't think it's as integral as we find out in Dr. Sleep. Whereas, I mean, The Shining, there's so much about Jack Torrance and him going crazy that the shine is not as, not that it's not important. I just don't think it's front and center as much. And I don't think it's consistent in The Shining either.
I think you're right. I think that's one of the great great jokes of The Shining, the film, is that you have this idea. I mean, it's the title of the movie, but you have this idea put forward when Danny is having conversations with this strange character. When before they even with Tony. He's having conversations with Tony before they even leave to go to the Overlook, and then he gets there and he meets the cook, and the cook, suddenly is talking to his head, and his idea is like, oh, this special power you have is going to be a thing. And you're right, it's not really a crucial thing, because the two big points that sort of change the course of the Shining is, when Danny comes back from room 237, he's all ripped up and his throat's all strangled, and Wendy presumes that Jack has done it because there's nowhere else But Danny stops talking. He doesn't speak at all. He doesn't say anything at that moment. So he doesn't explain, oh, I've seen a ghost or there are ghosts here. He doesn't explain to his mum, hey, there's supernatural stuff going on and I can sense it and see it because I have this special power. He just doesn't fucking talk, which is like, that's kind of his superpower, is talking. He's like, hey, I know shit you don't, so let me talk. The other thing that I always find absolutely hilarious in The Shining is when Dick O'Halloran gets this sort of scream from Danny that I've got to go and help. And he calls and he can't get through. And there's all these scenes of Dick. He's in Florida. He calls. He can't get through. He calls. He can't get through. So he makes a decision. He gets on a plane. You see him. He's on the plane. He's traveling. He gets to the airport. He calls his friend. He's like, I need a snowcat. I got to get up to the Overlook Hotel. The guy's like, okay. So he drives to there. He gets in the snowcat. You see him driving through the snow. It's interspersed with all the action. It's taking, all this time for him to get there. He gets there. He goes in. There's that really long, slow tracking shot where he's walking around. Hello, anybody here? Hello, anybody here? He's walking around. And then bam, he just gets hit in the fucking chest with an axe and he's dead. So it's amazing. This guy spends all this time traveling all this way to save the day and immediately walks in the door and gets killed. It's a great bit in that film that is so funny. But Dick had The Shining. He didn't fucking see that coming, did he? Like, it didn't help him one bit. Didn't help him one bit.
No.
The only thing that does help is that Wendy decides to clock Jack in the head with a fucking baseball bat and give them some time to kind of figure out what they're doing. And Danny just has a bit of smarts about him when he's in the maze and he backtracks on the snow and then hides. There's nothing supernatural about how Danny and Wendy get out of the Overlook. And in fact, having The Shining only hurts Dick O'Halloran.
Yeah.
If he didn't have it, he never would have wound up there getting the axe in the chest. So you're right. No, The Shining is not important in The Shining.
Yeah, I look. I think maybe because there's that connection or that sort of telepathy he has with Dick. So Dick knows something's happening. Obviously, can't get onto anyone via radio or via phone to the Overlook, but. I still feel like, I don't know. I think there was so much more that could have been explained with Danny in the first movie, which I think is done a lot better in this film. But yeah, each their own. I think. But it's funny you bring up Dick and the snowcat and getting up there. Like, obviously it was a snowstorm, or it was probably the peak of winter. But it's funny how in this movie it looked like it was pretty much winter, yet they seem to drive up all right.
Well, that's something they say in The Shining. Like, why aren't you open in the winter? It'd be great for ski sports. And the guy says, well, it's the cost. The cost to keep the roads clear would just be astronomical. We could never do it. Yet Abra and Danny drive up there with no hassle. And then, and this is something. I mean, I have a few issues with the ending of The Shining, but one of them is, the building explodes, and like 2 minutes later, the cops are coming down the mountain.
Yeah.
Like, how far away are these dudes, and why are they rushing so quickly to an explosion at the Overlook Hotel, which has been shut down since the 70s and is also in the middle of nowhere with nothing else around? Like, oh, is that the Overlook? Oh, well, I guess, should we head out there? Maybe we, let's take our time. Like, what's going to happen?
I did think that was awfully quick for them to even, like, who's calling 911? Unless someone sees it from a telescope or something, well, the Overlook's on fire. Like, who's rushing out that quickly? I felt like that was kind of bizarre, because my initial thought was like, oh, what's Abra going to do now? Is she going to get in the car? Is she going to drive? Can she get service to call 911 or call her mum or something? I was like, how's she, and then, oh, no way. The lights and sirens are coming. I can see them on the hill. Like, that's not happening. And you brought up the whole boiler room. Like, there's so much about, like, and this is not now trying to nitpick. I enjoyed the film, don't get me wrong. But the whole Overlook being, I guess, condemned or shut down because of what happened. But it happened before, but they kept being open, and Jack is just another victim. Mm-hmm. I can understand there being problems, but I find it hard to believe it either is not open, or maybe even a couple of years after they reopen and refurbish and whatever. I find that kind of weird. But then, like you said, the whole, and I think that's what you were angling before, the whole, if the boiler room is an issue and needs to be maintained, it hasn't been maintained, but the hotel's still sort of sitting there. I'm like,
Yeah.
Is there issues there? Like, is that a massive continuity error that,
Well,
or
yeah.
plot hole
Look,
that 30, 35, 36 years later or whatever, 39 years later, shouldn't there be an issue unless it's completely shut down? I'm not too sure.
well, look, I think part of, and I think this is what I mentioned at the start, in Mike Flanagan trying to, I guess, I don't know, make Stephen King happy or make Stephen King proud. You know, it's like, hey, you can finally get the ending that you always wanted. Is they do have to fudge a lot of things that if you stop and think about for a second, I think kind of just don't make sense. So we know the Overlook has a history of people dying there, of people being murdered there. We know that a few years before the events of The Shining, the caretaker brutally chopped up his children and wife, stacked them neatly in the corner, and then blew his own brains out. They didn't close shit. They just mopped it up and got on with business. This time around, this is the thing most people forget about The Shining. 2 people die in the entire of The Shining film. One of them is Dick O'Halloran, who gets an axe in the chest. The other is Jack Torrance, who freezes to death in the maze. Now, for a hotel of any kind, one person killing one other person and then freezing to death is not going to shut it down.
No, and that,
but also for a hotel that has the history of the Overlook to be like, oh my goodness, and this, I'm a big sort of believer in the context of the day, and in the film of The Shining, there is a scene where Grady, the former caretaker, who is now the bartender, is cleaning up Jack Torrance, and he's talking about how there's an interferer coming in. He talks about Dick O'Halloran, and the way he describes Dick O'Halloran is incredibly derogatory and uses language of a different age, but is very specific to the fact that Dick O'Halloran is an African American. Now, in the context of the film, I don't think the death of one African American employee is going to cause this hotel to shut down.
No.
I just don't think that makes any logical sense.
Yeah.
I certainly don't think the death of the caretaker who just froze to death. That's all he did.
Yeah.
Like Danny and
that's not messy
like,
at all.
Crazy and tried to kill us, and the hotel's gonna be like, hey, shut the fuck up. And I think, in fact, in the book, that's what happens at the hotel. Like the company gives them money, be like, shut up, don't tell anyone about this, go away. But yeah, no one, like, there is no massacre. 40 people don't get killed. Jack doesn't do horrible things to his family and then hang their bodies out the windows for the world to see. Like, one employee dies who shouldn't have been there, by the way. He was there when he was not supposed to be there. So it's very easy for the hotel to be like, hey, man, he wasn't even supposed to be in the state. Not our problem. This other guy just got lost in a maze. Not our problem. Let's reopen. The other thing that I think really that doesn't quite add up for me at the end of this is the whole trajectory of Danny's story is one of sort of redemption and reevaluation and realizing, like, hey, there's lots of great stuff in the world, and yes, something bad happened to me when I was a child, and yes, there are bad things happening in the world, but I can be a force of good. I can use this thing that I've hidden to help. There's this young child who needs my help. Let's get into it. Let's do it. And he does it. He kind of saves the day quite easily, honestly. Like, Rose the Hat gets taken down super easy. It's really anticlimactic for the way they build her up to be essentially a demigod throughout the whole movie. The way the other True Not revere her, the way that she seems to be spoken of as like this sort of you don't fuck with Rose the Hat. She will absolutely destroy you. And then she just gets fucked up real quick. But after all that, there is absolutely not one single reason for Danny Torrance to stay in that basement with that boiler. Like, the emergency services are on their way. He's not going to bleed to death. Like, tourniquet up that leg. You're all right, mate. Abra's in there with him, so they're not blocked in. The ghosts are all gone. Like, you're not going to get murdered if you try and leave. And then he just says, I'm exactly where I need to be, which I know is the line from earlier in the movie, but makes no sense. Like, no, get out of the... And it's a pet peeve I have of, like, characters heroically dying for no logical reason. Like, you've got a car, champ. Go outside, get in the car, drive away. If you get halfway down the hill and the Overlook hasn't exploded, be like, whoop, didn't do that right. Let's head back and I'll try again. But you don't need to sit there and die a horrible, fiery death. Like, he has nothing to atone for from a character point of view. He has nothing. Like, yes, they show it in the movie, and it makes a bit more of a deal in the book about the woman that he roots at the start who has a little baby, and he sees that. That's probably one of the, that's one of the most messed up scenes. But again, it's too clean. They do it digital with the baby, and it kind of is like that's not a real baby. But that is a big thing in the book. Like that haunts him throughout the book, and it really like it's the reason he gets clean. It's the reason he changes his life is because he's like, oh shit, I am indirectly responsible for this baby dying, and that weighs pretty heavily on him. In the movie, he really has like, by the time he gets into the shit with Abra and the True Knot, he's redeemed himself. He's got his 8-year chip. He's like, he is good. He's a good dude living a good life. He's all right. He doesn't have to die the hero's death at the end as the final act of atonement for his sins. He really is just like having a sit. Like, mate, hobble out. You're all right. You don't need to die. This is,
hey, if it was a Scream movie, he's totally alive.
If it's a Scream movie, he's running out of there. He's absolutely fine. He's gonna go for a fucking jog afterwards.
Yeah, it's I've only let's just say a few hours since I finished it, and that there was a few little problems like that I felt like why is he dying unless he was literally bleeding out and he was that far gone and he kind of knew and he was sensing his mum and he's like,
or he was having to use like his shining to keep the ghosts at bay so that Abra could escape. It was like, if I leave or if I try to move, I'm too weak. I can't walk and use my powers. I have to pick one. I'm going to save you. Like, give us something here, man. Give me a reason for this guy to just sit down and burn.
To sort of just lay down.
It's just like, what the fuck is happening? Why is this guy just giving up? So weird. I also I do think that the way that they mirror the stuff from the original, like on the staircase with Rose versus Danny, mirroring Wendy versus Jack.
Yeah,
I think that was a bit heavy-handed. I get it. It's fun. It's fun to go back to the Overlook. It's fun to recreate these moments, but this story works so hard to be its own story for so much of the film, and then in the second half of the third act, it feels very tacked on the way they go back to the Overlook. They're not there very long. Not much happens there. Yes, that's where the final battle happens, but it could have happened really anywhere because Danny carries the ghosts with him. He doesn't have to be at the Overlook to let him out. Like that's kind of the thing. The ghosts follow him around and find him wherever he goes. So he locks the boxes in his head. So he could have been, on a boat. He could have been hanging out in an apartment. Like there's no direct connection, or at least no reference or established direct connection that it has to be the Overlook. Yeah, it's just like they're the boxes in his head, and when he decides to let them out. And look, all of that aside, fucking cool scene.
Yeah,
where he's just like they're starving. When she's about to kill him, it's like they're starving, and he lets them out. And it's like, oh, that's fucking badass. And they go and get her. Like, okay, that's really cool. More of that, please. And
100%. Look, I think they'd set the scene. I wasn't sport, so I did not know they ended up there until obviously when they're on the drive and he's like, we're going to Colorado. And then I know where he's going. And I get the logic he used in that moment. You're right. I mean, if they're in his mind and they're after him anywhere, then why does it have to be the Overlook? But I kind of guess.
Also, if he's trying to protect Abra, why go to the one place on Earth is fucking evil and dangerous? Like you're about to fight a force of pure evil, and you've chosen the battleground of a place of pure evil.
Yeah.
Hang on, dude.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one because you're right. They probably don't need to go there, but I think for movie reasons, it was important for them to go there because it was this point of maybe burying some trauma a bit for him, redeeming himself there. I don't know. But I think the setting didn't bother me because it obviously links back to The Shining and it obviously heavily leans into. And we saw it in the maze. I thought that was really cool to go back into the maze. And obviously walk, the corridors of that hotel were pretty cool to see them sort of all worn down and everything like that. So, from an aesthetic point of view, it was good to go back there. But
Yeah.
you're right. The plot device is that you
I wish they had
really-
worked a little harder to build it into the rest of the story. I did. Yeah, and I think maybe that is part of this this kind of push pull he has between the episodic storytelling and the cinematic storytelling. You know, stuff like when it's back and forthing between early in the movie when you're jumping between the True Knot and Danny and Abra and True Knot and Danny and Abra. It really feels like that's like, hey, this episode is setting up the Abra character. This episode is setting up the True Knot. This is setting up Danny. And then, you know, at the end of the season, they're going to come together. I kind of wish we had have just gotten Danny for, you know, Danny, and then, or I wish we had gotten the True Knot set up, you know, early on, and then just Danny all the way up until the chalkboard high was the first time that we got any indication that this Abra character existed, because they kept coming to her, but they're not really doing enough one way or the other. It was like they couldn't decide whose movie it was going to be. And so they didn't fully flesh out a lot of stuff about Danny that I would have liked to have seen more of. And they, you know, they showed us some stuff, but you know, they did the whole 8 years later thing. We just jump, and he's just like, no, you're just clean and sober now. Like, we don't have time because we've got to jump back to showing Abra with spoons, but not really doing much with that. And then she hasn't really shown it to her parents for 8 years, so that whole backstory doesn't really matter. Like, she could have just said that in a sentence. Like, when I was a kid, I used to talk to my parents about it, but they got weird, so I just stopped.
Yeah.
We don't need to see that scene.
Yeah, true. You didn't even have to have the whole party scene with the magician.
No, like, it's
I can do
quite,
that.
yeah, and even just like little things in that scene of the party clown magician guy being a bit of a dick. Like, you know, when Abra's like, I can do magic, he's like, that's great, honey. Like, we don't need that. We don't need any of that. This is a 3-hour movie. We don't need the runtime. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. And the stuff with, like, yeah, it's good. We got to get the mum away. So you're like, oh, I've got to go see Mima. Is she gonna be okay? Like, it's just fucking okay. Get out, you know. And the dad, he's kind of a half-done character. He's kind of in, but he's not in. There's just lots of little bits where, for a movie so long with a story, you know, so rich, and coming from a novel, which, you know, in a novel you've got time to, as much time as you want to build the character. The characters felt really thin all the way throughout. One of the ones I was most disappointed about was Cliff Curtis's character, whose name has just gone out of my head. But his friend, who, like, when he comes to town, drives a tiny train, and he helps
Billy.
out. Billy something, Billy Good Guy, something like that is his name. It is kind of like that. It's a real, like, this is a good character, listen to the name sort of name. But in the book, early on, with the parts that I have read, Billy Freeman, there you go, Billy Freeman, that character is really, like, laid out for you. You know him really, really well. So, and again, spoilers, when you get to the scene where he dies, it's really impactful, and you're really upset because you're like, fuck, that guy was so good. I know so much about him. I care about him. I'm so bummed he's dead. And yeah, Danny is, like, sad when he dies. That's the last time he's referenced or acknowledged in any way in the film. Like, Danny doesn't, you know, there's not even a look in his eye where he's kind of like, this is for Billy, you fucks. Like, it's just gone. He's like, I'm sad, moving on.
Yeah.
That guy's just dead in the woods now. And it's like, that guy, like, saved
Well,
your life.
it kind of, like, even when he becomes he's within Abra and in the car talking with a crow, and it's kind of like, oh, we've both lost people.
Yeah.
You know, the crow kind of says that a couple of times, like, oh, well, you lost someone, but we lost people too, so kind of bad. Like, and yeah, that's barely all. I guess we're saying, like, I kind of feel like that's the other thing. Even with the kid, Bradley Trevor, who's found it, and they obviously dig him up.
Yeah.
There's nothing. I know you can't tell the whole story and you can't show everything. I get it, but I sometimes think in a movie like this, like I'm not too sure. Like, is there? I know they needed the gloves, so they can't really run to the police. But then there's no. I feel like it would have been nice.
What's
to
the kid in a fucking hole? Forgot about it.
Well,
it's such a big plot point too.
Yeah, and I wonder if that it's a weird thing, but it's kind of like that went in a completely different direction than I was expecting. I knew, like, when Abra said about the glove and the other guy using the glove, that would help us track them. I got that point, but then I was kind of like, but wouldn't you notifying the police with an anonymous call to say, I know where this kid is. I think I know the people that kill him. I don't know. You just all you have to say is, I'm a medium, I'm a psychic, whatever. And give the location, the police find the kid, and then the True Knight go, oh shit, they're onto us. They actually know kind of a bit about us. Or I don't know. I just think they decided the whole police thing was too hard. And then Danny even says it. He's like, oh, these people don't care about the police.
Yeah.
When the dad goes, well, I'm calling the police or the FBI. And he's like, I don't think they care about the police, which is probably true. And there's probably enough people that are being bought off and or in high positions that would somehow sweep it under the carpet. I don't know. I was really expecting the police to be involved in at least the kid, number 19, the baseball boy, Bradley. And that was nothing happened. So they left the body there? And I don't know. It's like, I know you can't tell this huge elaborate story in 3 hours necessarily, but even just a little passing I don't know. I thought that was the same thing then, like you said, like you've shot all these people in the woods and obviously they die, they disappear, they become ash, like almost like a vampire. They become steam, and then there's all these clothes in the woods, and then there's a guy that's put a gun to his head, and poor old Billy, and I don't know. It's one of those, I just feel like, they move from scene to scene, but it's like there's almost like no consequences of what's happened beforehand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a little fast and loose with some of the stuff. There's also things that, or a thing, I don't know if it happened more than once, that I got really excited about that didn't keep happening, which is when Danny goes to his first meeting and like says to the doctor, like, hey, you think about your watch, you left at this place. And the doctor's like, huh? And then it cuts and he's having a meeting with the doctor in the doctor's office. And the doctor's office is an exact replica of the manager's office from the Overlook.
Yes.
Everything about it is exactly the same. That was so cool. I was like, oh, fuck, yes. And I thought, oh, okay, like that's going to happen. Like we're going to see throughout the movie, stuff is going to be exact replicas. It's like it's going to be threaded through this idea that Danny can't escape the Overlook no matter what he does. It's being threaded, and that will be the thing that draws him back to the Overlook at the end, is this idea that it doesn't matter where you go in the world, the Overlook is there. You've got to confront it head on. But from as far as I can tell, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, I think that's the only time they do that in the whole movie. That's just it's just a one-off, like little, hey, look at this, his office is the same as the manager's office.
Yeah.
But there's so much.
But even that scene was weird, I thought.
It's so, look, it makes no sense. In the book, there's a bit more about that doctor, but not enough to warrant putting him in his own scene, and not enough to cast like Bruce Greenwood, who's a reasonably well-known actor, to play that one tiny part, and not enough to replicate the manager's office from The Shining to like really set it like this is important when it's not important at all. It means nothing. And the manager's office in The Shining movie, this I don't know if you've seen the film. There's a documentary called Room 237 about all of the crazy shit that goes into the Shining, but the manager's office like basically can't exist in the hotel. Like if you look, people have drawn schematics and looked at and it's impossible for that office to have a window where it is looking where it's looking. It just it can't happen, which means, and then you notice lots of other stuff throughout the movie that is just impossible. And it turns out this is all deliberate. Like Kubrick built a set that is impossible so that, when you look at it, you're like, oh, everything happening inside the hotel the entire time is always fucking with you. Even when you don't really like, even early on, even early on when Jack's typing and you're like, oh, he's just writing his book, and you don't find out until the end. Oh no, he's been insane the whole time. And he's just been writing all work and no play, make Jack a dull boy. All work and no play, make Jack a dull boy. Like, he's always been crazy. The hotel has always been fucking with you. It just showed it in different ways. Whereas in this movie, it's just like, hey, look at this. His office is pink, and it's the office from The Shining. Remember that? Okay, next scene. Like,
but even that scene, like you said, you got Bruce Greenwood, who's a great actor and quite a well-known actor. Yeah, a small part, almost like a cameo, or effectively a cameo. But even that scene, I was kind of like, he starts off like he's really skeptical of Danny and almost like accusingly like, how did you know about my watch? As if Danny had stolen the watch and decided, oh, I don't feel bad, I'm going to put it back because I'm turning over a new leaf. And then he's like, oh, yeah, well, I get gut feels too and all that sort of stuff. And then the next turn, oh, so you're looking for work. And I'm like, the fuck is happening in this
Yeah, it doesn't go
scene?
anywhere.
Well, it's weird because it's like he's angry and he's accusing him and he's very skeptical of Danny, but then in the next breath he flips. It's like we've had a deleted scene where a whole thing's been missing because Danny doesn't really explain himself well. He obviously doesn't talk about the shine, and then the next minute he's like, "Oh, so you're looking for work? Oh, you might be a good, nurse in this, hospice." Like what the? Yeah, anyway, I just thought that was a weird scene as well, and that went nowhere.
Speaking of the hospice, they also do nothing with the Doctor Sleep part. Like they do nothing.
Which is the title.
The fact that he helps people go on. They do nothing with the fact that there's a cat that clearly has the shining. Azrael, who can't die, it seems, because that cat is it's been around forever, and then 8 years later, it's still there.
It looks a bit bigger. I did think the cat looked bigger, but I was surprised it was the same cat.
But yeah, like
8 years later,
the cat has the shining. Danny helps people pass on. They start calling him Doctor Sleep. That's the name of the movie. Just pops up and then goes away and doesn't come back again.
Yep.
Also, that name, and that's something that has always bugged me about this from the moment the book got announced. I do not like the title of this movie. I don't like the title of the book, and I get fucked off with the names in this movie.
Like
Rosie the Hat, Crow Daddy, Barry the Chunk, Apron Annie, Snakebite Andy, even Abra. Like, she's magic. We'll call her Abra. Like, Abracadabra. We
that's dumb. Yeah.
The names in this movie drive me insane, and they really take me out of it every time because the True Knot always refer to each other by their full stupid name. So they never be like, hey, Andy wants to see you. Like, hey, Snakebite Andy wants to see you. And the grandpa who dies, and they're like, you were there for Empires and thing. His name's Grandpa Flick. If you've been around to watch Empires rise and fall, you really think you're going to call yourself Grandpa Flick? What the fuck, bro? Like, and Rosie the Hat is like, oh, you're looking at my hat. Oh, I always wear this hat so much so it's become part of my name. Okay, tell us the story. No, fuck you. Like, we get nothing. Like, they keep just alluding to shit and giving us nothing in this movie. It's like, what the fuck? Come on, man.
I feel like this movie needed to be called almost The Shining 2 or The Shine or something. I think Doctor Sleeps is such a bad title.
It's a really bad title for a book, a movie, for a character. I get that, like, the True Knot are meant to be sort of these Romany type people who, they travel in caravans and they have unique names that they call each other. And
bloody gypsies.
Yeah, but it's not. It takes me out of the movie. It took, when I was reading the book, it took me out of the book. It takes me out of the movie. It's like, these are not names that are really conducive to, like, Rosie the Hat. I'm not scared of Rosie the Hat as a character. Just call her Rosie or Rose. Like, less is more. I think there's too much of nothing going on in this story. And I think they would have, like, The Shining, the film, is bare bones. There's more questions than answers in that movie. How the fuck is Jack Torrance in the photo at the end? Is he a ghost the Overlook sent out to bring Danny in because they wanted his shining and it all backfired? Is it once the hotel claims you get sort of sucked into its history? Is it he's on a perpetual cycle where he keeps living and dying different lives, but every time, like, there's all these questions. You never get any answers. I feel like in Doctor Sleep, there's just like, meh. Blow him up at the end, maybe. Okay, that's fine. And then Abra can see ghosts. I don't think that was one of her powers, was it? Like, she can see the ghost of her dad. She's like, Dad's fine. And the mum's like, oh, okay. And then they're both really happy their dad's dead. It's like, wait, what? What are you talking about?
As long as he's happy.
Oh, if he's happy, then I guess we can stop being sad. All right, la 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 la. And Danny seems perfectly happy to be a ghost. Even though Dick O'Halloran told us in no uncertain terms, like, this world is a dream of a dream now, and being here hurts. And then Danny's like, oh, it's good to see you. I'll be around. Don't worry. And Dad's like, I like being dead. I'll be here all the time. Like, you told us that the dead coming back was hard. I don't know. Look, there's a lot of nitpicking, but I
Mm.
feel like there's a lot of nitpicking because there's a lot of good ideas. Like we get
Mm.
thrown so many good ideas in this movie, and then they kind of don't do a lot with a lot of it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny you say that Flanagan was from TV because you kind of feel like there's so many good ideas that maybe this was like a 1 hour episode or 45-minute episode series in the making where you can really flesh out the characters and explain it a lot better and yeah.
Yeah. And look, the thing is, I find that Mike Flanagan is someone I kind of have an I don't, I'm in and I'm out on Flanagan all the time because he made a great film, also a Netflix film called Hush. I don't know if you've seen that, about like a deaf woman who's being stalked by this it's like kind of almost like a slasher, but it's Hush is fantastic, really great film. Came in 2016. He wrote it, he directed it. Really, really cool film. Or he co-wrote it with the woman who plays the lead. He did a prequel, I think, to the Ouija movie, which the Ouija movie was kind of like a whole bunch of nothing, and then he did the prequel, and it's great.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be good, and it is. Then he did the Netflix adaptation of another Stephen King short story, Gerald's Game, which I thought was okay, but a lot of people seem to think is incredible and one of the best things ever. And then he hits us with Haunting of Hill House, which is sort of his big, here I am, this is the kind of stuff I do. And from there, it's Haunting of Blind Manor, Midnight Mass, Midnight Club. It's all TV from there. And he seems to enjoy that way more. But he does have a bit of a tendency to drag it out. Midnight Mass is 8 episodes. I think it could have been 4. You know, Haunting of Hill House, I think, is 2 episodes too long. Haunting of Blind Manor is kind of, it was a bit thin from the start, and he dragged it right out. Like I don't know what the sweet spot is for Flanagan, because I think he's incredible. I think he's incredibly talented. I think his writing is great. I think his ear for dialogue is really great. I think his direction is really cool. I don't know if he just needs to like find his dream producer or editor who can come in and be like, don't do that, cut that, come in here, fix that. Or maybe he just makes stuff, you know, that is for people that aren't me. Because I know plenty of people who absolutely froth for everything Mike Flanagan has done. They think Midnight Mass is the best thing since sliced bread. They think Haunting of Hill House is the greatest horror anything ever. You know, and I can't really begrudge those people that. Maybe it's just not my jam. But I don't know. I want more or less from him. I don't know which one it is. Give me like a 7-hour version of Doctor Sleep, or give me like a 2-hour version.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's neither my ass nor my elbow a bit, this film.
Yeah. Look, don't get me wrong. I actually enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the film.
Well, that's the
but
thing. I enjoyed
now
the
that
hell out of it.
as
I
we
enjoyed
discuss it
watching it.
through, as we have just, you know, as we're discussing it through, it's definitely, you know, you peel back, as you would normally say, peel back the onion. It gets a bit, you know, there's layers, but then it's like, did they really put it together? I don't know. It's I think they had all these ideas, or and look, how long is the Stephen King book? Because the Stephen King books can get pretty big. So I wonder if there was a lot of ideas there that they were like, how do we?
It's not one of his biggest, but it's not like It or the Stand. But it's you know, it's not a novella. It's a pretty decent chunk of a book.
Yeah, because I do wonder if that's the other problem. There's a lot of stuff to look at that once you start to condense it down to a movie, like you said, like, okay, they maybe dumb down the mysticism of the true knot, but then there's that sacrifice story, but then you've got to have Danny, you've got to have I don't know, there's unfortunately some things don't get properly explained, and you know, him tacking on the original Shining ending to the ending of this, does that again sacrifice? I don't know.
Look, I think that's probably the film's biggest misstep for me is tacking on the ending from a different story into this, because it is a very different story. And it's, I guess, you're kind of a bit hamstrung when, if you're making a sequel to The Shining that is based on the book, which is a sequel to the book. Stephen King, you know, didn't write a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's Shining. He wrote a sequel to his Shining. But also he wrote a very, very different story. And even just reading the two books, like the tone is so different. The style of writing, like I said, the book feels more like a fantasy than a straight horror. which is an interesting way to go about it. But Stephen King deliberately tried to make Doctor Sleep very different from The Shining. I think Mike Flanagan probably he kind of wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
Like he's making the film version and the
Yeah.
famous film version, despite the fact that Stephen King did the TV one. The famous film version is Kubrick's, so he
Yeah.
had to make a sequel to that, which meant there were certain things he had to do. And I guess the biggest problem you're going to face coming up against this is you're going to be compared to The Shining, and this film really shouldn't be compared to The Shining, but it goes out of its way to compare itself to The Shining. Like, so as an audience, we can't help it. It's like, hey, here's the Overlook. Here's this. Here's this. Remember this. Remember this. Here's a flashback. Here's this. Here's someone doing Wendy. It's like, okay, you really want us to think about The Shining when we watch this movie, and you really want them meshed together. But now we have no choice as an audience but to go, well, I'm thinking about The Shining, and you're going to come up short, which is unfair. It's an unfair comparison. Like, how the hell does anyone make a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's film that is, one of the greatest horrors and also one of the greatest films of the 21st century? Like, it's a fucking impossible task.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I don't mind this one, because I think because it's a different story at the end of the day, and it is focused on Danny, that they're able to look at different stuff. And then obviously the True Knot being the other part of the story in Abra, that it's not about the Overlook and it's not about Jack Torrance. Only right to the end it becomes about that. But it is, in essence, it's a sequel, but it's quite different in a lot of ways. It's not about going back to the Overlook. It's not another new family going to the Overlook 10 years after, or even him going back to the start, or you know what I mean? Like, it's not intrinsically tied to it until till the end.
Until
then
it
comes
is.
till it is. But it is this whole other story about his life, 39 years later. And I kind of like that it is different in that regard, that it's not just all about Jack Torrance and even Wendy, really. It's just about Danny and his life afterwards, and his gift, I guess, and the fact that he's shut out that gift, so he can't be located, and he's an alcoholic. So it's not all, sunshine and lollipops for him right now. And I like that it's different from that. Like, it's not exactly, sometimes when we talk about, on this podcast, we talk about sequels, and sometimes it is good to go back to a familiar place, but then sometimes some sequels, it's important to go somewhere different and be a bit different and have a different tone. But the one thing, you talked about the score before, and that's the one thing that blew me away, how good the score was.
Oh my God.
At replicating those emotions and themes from The Shining. Like, still having its own, its own tone at points, but when those certain little links to the Overlook or Jack Torrance or whatever, going back to it, you just felt like that whole score was very well done, because it did feel like you were watching a Shining sequel and you were part of that universe still. So that was the one thing. While the movie and a lot of its tone, for a lot of it, was quite different to the first movie and separate to that, I think the score kept you felt like you're in part of that. And it helps when you've watched both back to back, but I did feel like I was still part of that world. The score is also,
it's pretty iconic, like especially the opening.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Like drone from the original, like that, dun, 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 like getting that in there. The vibe of the film is most alive in the score, and I could honestly sit and listen to Newton Brothers scores all day. I do. I sit around and listen to the Midnight Club score just for fun. It's incredible. Everyone should do it. So that is great, and I think, I know I've been nitpicking a lot, but I think the acting is great. I think Ewan McGregor is fucking on song in this movie. He does great. I think the young girl who's playing Abra, I think she does a great job. I think Rebecca Ferguson is great as well.
Yeah, I love it.
I think the guy who plays Crow Daddy is great. Like, they're all, I said before, I love Cliff Curtis. These actors are all great and doing incredible work in this film. And there wasn't a single one of them that I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, they're all friggin' awesome and really bring a lot of scenes up levels that I don't think would have quite come up, without that. Even what's his name, Henry Thomas. Like, yes, he has an impossible task, but he has a pretty goddamn good swing at it. Like
Yeah.
everyone in this movie is great. I think the score is great. I think the writing is mostly great. It's a film where if I think about an individual department, I struggle to have an issue with it. Like the cinematography, is it as good as the cinematography in The Shining? No. Is it very good cinematography? Yes. Are there some fucking kick-ass shots in this? Oh my God, yes. Like when Rosie travels into what she thinks is Abra's mind to flick around, and like the flying through and the way she comes in through the room and gets her hand, like, oh man, there is some cool shit in this movie to look at visually. There's nothing I can really bitch about individually, but there is a shine that's missing from it. There's that certain something. There's that certain something that just when you look at it, it doesn't make me look again. Like I said, I wasn't glued to the screen in this propulsive thing.
So something you touched on earlier, Mike Flanagan got sort of the go ahead from Warner Brothers to do his director's cut. So he went back for reshoots, or there was stuff that he already had to be cut that he was able to
repeat? He had it all.
Okay.
And he was given the money to go and reshoot. I think there was he had to do the editing, the color grading, the sound mixing. He had to bring the Newton brothers back to write more score to fill in it. Like they had to write an extra half an hour of score. I think there was some ADR stuff. I don't think I've read anything about there being reshoots for the director's cut, but I do know it cost a substantial amount of money just to because the sheer amount of footage too, and also because he re-edited the whole film. There are scenes that are longer that are in there, which of course every time you add it, you've got to take the raw footage, you've got to extend the scene, you've got to cut it back, you've got to.
Because I was going to say,
money it costs to make
one of my big nitpicks, I don't know, it's terrible and it's not necessarily his fault, but I always think it stands out like dog's balls because Ewan McGregor, when he has a beard in a movie and then he doesn't have it and they have to reshoot with a beard, his fake beard looks shit.
Yes.
And that goes back as far as the Phantom Menace. No, Phantom Menace, or was it Attack of the Clones?
Attack of the Clones is the beard. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's moments where you can totally tell that, that's his true and natural beard that he grew for the movie. And then obviously he's got rid of it. He's on his next project and they're like, we've got reshoots. And you can see this really bad beard. And there's definitely scenes in this film at the start when he does have the beard where it looks very true and natural, and then there's other shots where it go, that looks fake as shit. So clearly that's either a reshoot after the fact or what have you. It's just one of those things my eye picks up real quickly with Ewan McGregor.
It kills
beard.
it.
And it's like, I know, I kind of just think now you're a really bad Obi-Wan Kenobi, but what else? There was something else. Did you see that? Of course, there's an Elm Street in this film as well. Did you know that?
No, I missed the Elm Street.
Yeah, so one of the shots for when they got into the town of Frasier, so Ewan gets off. He's already been there. I think it's when Abra's coming, but there's a overhead shot of the clock tower and all that, and you can actually see the street sign. It's Elm Street. And I'm like, oh. There always has to be an Elm Street. And then I did notice, and again, I'm sure this is way too obvious, but I'm pretty sure the house that Abra lives in is 1980. So 1980 is the house number, which is obviously the year The Shining came out. But I think that gets referenced anyway. That's not like the film's, The Shining is in 1980 as well. I don't think there's a time difference from memory. So
no, I think you're right. I think that is.
Yeah. So I mean, but nudge, wink, wink. Yeah, her house is 1980. So yeah,
amazing. I haven't come across any. Yeah, I haven't come across any information about big reshoots or anything like that.
Yeah.
Look, it's like the post-production was huge on the original. I think it was 30 weeks post-production on the theatrical cut.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it would have been a big big redo to go back and do it again, and a big call for the studios to do it. Thank God they did. Honestly, sometimes studios they get it right. Sometimes letting directors or creatives go back in and have a crack at something the way they wanted it to be done. It's a great idea. Sometimes you shouldn't. Sometimes you're right to not let directors have director's cut. This is not one of those cases. I think definitely. I think if anyone, I don't know why you would have gotten this far to listen to the podcast, have not seen the movie at all. But if you haven't seen it at all, I recommend watching the director's cut for the first time. If you've only seen the theatrical cut, I highly recommend watching the director's cut because it is a noticeably different experience. You won't be watching. It's not one of those director's cuts where like, oh, it's 7 minutes longer and this scene's different, or we have one added scene where two characters talk for a bit longer about something that also gets explained later. It's like, no, this is different. From the opening scene all the way through the movie. This is a different film, and it is a worthwhile experience to go and check it out as a standalone entity. Well, I don't know if there's anything else to say about this movie.
No, I don't think so. I think overall, like, I'm not going to even really. Do we do our ratings like we normally do? I think it's one of those films. I think it's still enjoyable to watch. It's worth watching if you're a fan of The Shining. I think if you haven't seen The Shining, it'd be weird to watch this one, to be totally honest. And that's.
I think this is a sequel where you have to watch the original. Which again, another bold move to make a sequel this far away from the original,
and not have a title sort of.
Well, I mean, like, it's not The Shining 2 / Doctor Sleep. It's just called Doctor Sleep. It's not, similar to what they did with the recent Halloween movies, where they're like, hey, this is a sequel to the original Halloween movie. But also, in fact, I had a conversation with someone last week. We were talking about Halloween. They're like, oh, I've never watched the Halloween movies. I'll have to check them out. I'm like, well, there's 13 of them, so strap in. They're like, really? Already? I'm like, what do you mean already? And they're like, didn't the first one come out like 5 years ago? And I was like, sorry? And like, it came out. I was like, they're like Halloween. Halloween came out like 2018. I'm like, Halloween did come out 2018. That is a sequel to the Halloween that came out in 1978. And they were like, what? I'm like, and then I sat them down. I was like, let me talk.
No.
Timeline, my friend.
So you should say, here's our podcast. Listen to our podcast.
I was like, this is how it goes. I was like, all right, this how, and then I explained like the different timelines of Halloween, and they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I was like, but also you can just watch the 3 new ones without having seen any others, and it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Like David Gordon Green's Halloween 2018, you could watch that and you get enough from that movie, like, oh, I get it. Like, 40 years ago, this guy killed a couple of her friends and now she's messed up. Cool. I don't need to see another movie to know that. Whereas if you watch Doctor Sleep, like, why the fuck is this guy talking about The Shining? Why is there who's this fucking ghost he's talking to? Because they don't explain Dick O'Halloran at all in the movie. He's there. He's like, you remember the first time I saw you? We talked about The Shining. I'm like, yeah, I remember that because I watched The Shining.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, it's definitely
a lot of really impressive stuff about this getting made at all, I think.
I wonder how much did it make much money at the cinema?
Oh, that's a great. I mean, if they let him do a director's cut, it must have made money. There's no way they would have given.
I was going to say that would have been pre-COVID too, but I do feel like it is. I knew what it was about, but I do feel like a newer generation go, oh, Doctor Sleep, oh, that's interesting, but have no idea that it's linked to The Shining. So you kind of go, well.
Well, I think did
they advertise it as
this came out in 2019? The theatrical cut. When did the new It come out?
The new It, like part 2.
Oh, well, part 1. Well, part 1 was 2017. So this was 2 years after It, and the new It really like restarted the huge excitement around Stephen King books being turned into movies, which is why we got Pet Sematary and why we got Doctor Sleep, and why we got all these Stephen King books being turned to movies again. So I think probably there was a lot of excitement around Stephen King anything. So like, hey, we can bring out a Stephen King movie that isn't a remake, but is a sequel to one of his most famous books, which is a legit sequel. And that's the other
Yep.
thing that I think this should get credit for, is like you said, like this isn't The Shining 2 and it's a new family going to the Overlook, and here we go again. Like Pet Cemetery 2 is just a made for money sequel to the Stephen King book. It's not a sequel. In fact, very few Stephen King adaptations get like slapped on not written by Stephen King sequels. It's kind of the big selling point, is this was written by Stephen King. So it's nice that you're getting this. It's nice that they waited and they did it. And, I'm just trying to find out how much money this thing made at the box office.
And it was one of those movies I did want to see at the cinemas. I just didn't get around to it. Missed it. Don't know what happened.
Yeah, I intended to see it in cinemas. It just didn't quite happen. So it made... Okay, yeah. So it made money. It was a $45 million budget, and it came away with $72.3 million domestic. So that's just US. US and Canada. 40 million. Oh no, sorry, that's a mistake. $45 million budget. Ooh. All right, that's interesting. $45 million budget, made $31.5 million in the US and Canada, 40 million worldwide. So the worldwide total is 72 million. So it didn't make its money back domestic, which I think most days studios consider that a flop.
Yep, because it would have been advertised a lot too. So how did you get a director's cut? Or was it they were hoping on?
I mean, I guess worldwide, and that's just box office. It might be one of those movies that found a huge life on streaming.
But I feel like the director's cut was available. Like, so I've got the 4K version of the film and then the Blu-ray that has the director's cut.
I freaking struggled to find. I looked for a hard copy of this. I could not find that in stores. I didn't want to order it because I didn't know if it would get here in October, and I wanted to watch it. I looked through all the streamers, couldn't find it advertised anywhere. It was only because I was so desperate and kept looking through. I eventually went on Apple and was looked up Dr. Sleep, and then searched to see if it had any extras. They have the iTunes extras, and buried in the iTunes extras of Dr. Sleep was the director's cut. So it's completely unadvertised that this was a part of it. So I ended up buying it on Apple, and it comes with both versions, but not advertised at all, which I thought was weird because I think it's a selling point. That
100%. I got the. Again, I would have. Geez, it doesn't feel like that long ago I bought the 4K, but I would have got it when I got The Shining, when there was some sort of JB discount for buy 3 4Ks, get the fourth one free, or buy 2 get one free, and it was kind of like, well, I'll get them both because I do want to watch it, so why not?
Well, we got the director's cut in 2020.
Yeah,
like that's pretty fast for a director's cut.
Yeah. They must have had it almost in the background ready to go.
Yeah,
I feel like they must have almost made the theatrical. He's like, I've got this 3-hour film. And like, yeah, we're going to do the 3-hour film. We want a 2.5-hour film. And he's found a way to cut it. And then they've had this, possibly the director's cut, almost in the back, ready to go to be a selling point for the physical media, just another revenue stream.
I mean, it is a good, it's a good pitch to get it on, to get people's money again on streaming and physical media. I think also like 2019, people weren't quite into long movies then, but now like people want long movies.
Yeah.
Like, people want to go and see Oppenheimer and spend 3 hours like going to see a movie. People want to see a long friggin' movie these days. So even basic popcorn fare like Barbie is like $2.40 or something. Like movies are long again, which I'm all for. I love a long movie. Gimme. If I'm going to sit down and put it on, I think I either want it to be like 96 minutes, get me in and get me out, or I want it to be like 3+ hours and let's do it. Let's get in and let's watch this friggin' movie. This kind of, let's make movies 2.5 hours. Now piss off. If I'm going to sit down and watch a movie for 2.5 hours, I'm going to sit down and watch it for 3. If you got 3 hours of shit, like give it to me, baby.
Give me.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I think I enjoy this movie. I think I'll definitely watch it again one day. I think I'm glad it exists. I
Yeah.
think it's probably a movie I'll enjoy more the more I watch. Honestly, like the first time I didn't even get through it. This time I really happily watched all 3 hours of it
Mm.
and was really glad it was 3 hours long. And I think there's really great stuff in it. Like I said, I don't think there's any individual part of this movie to bitch about. There's just lots of little things that's like, that could have been just a bit better. Or you could have just not done that. You could have done the fuck, you're so close. But
Yeah.
hey, look, whatever. What the fuck do I know? There's plenty of people who think this movie is fucking great. So
I was going to say I was actually thinking having a spin-off movie of The True Knot would be more interesting too. If they wanted to go down that path and do another sequel, I think there's something to do. Like they said, like I was also, and not to drag this podcast out any longer, but the one thing I wasn't too sure of, like they kind of make it sound like they live forever, so like vampires, but I wasn't sure how long they'd actually all live. And then when we find out Grandpa Flick has been just around to see Empire's
they
Rise
made it
and
sound
Fall.
like he was hanging out with Tutankhamun or something. Like,
Yeah, and
he's
I'm like,
really been around a while.
And I'm like, oh, that's crazy. So I'm like, maybe seeing the initial starting point of The True Knot would be a kind of cool movie, possibly. Or even how maybe, through another era, and then maybe how Rose the Hat becomes a thing. I don't know. It's anyway, that's a whole other sidebar. But
I am a little bit bummed that they kill Danny at the end of the movie, because I do think, like, if in 10 years,
if you want to do another sequel, yeah.
well, if in 10 years, like, give me old man Danny Torrance, and another issue rears its head. I don't know what, but
yeah,
bring something else along. I would happily watch old man Danny Torrance, because I think Ewan McGregor does a great job of this. I'd happily watch him be old man Danny Torrance getting into mischief, especially if King wrote another book about this character and made it a little sneaky trilogy or something. Like, bring it, or incorporate him to, like, Dick O'Halloran he pops up in It, so the universes are connected. We could see Danny Torrance show up. Give me Stephen King Avengers. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's fucking do it. The Avengers is done. Nobody wants to watch Marvel movies anymore.
No.
Let's have Pennywise versus Danny Torrance. They're making Welcome to Derry now, the prequel series.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But come back and make It Chapter 3. And can you imagine like a third act reveal where, like, it's It Chapter 3, the Losers Club is like, half of them are dead. There's only a couple left. They're busted. They're broken. They don't know what to do. And then suddenly in through the door walks Danny fucking Torrance, and he's like, I got an idea. You're like, oh shit, Danny's here. Fuck yes. And then man, I would pay double to see that in a cinema. That would be so cool. But look, whatever. You get what you get. This has been sick, man. I'm so glad we're back.
Yep.
This is great.
Yes, we are
this
back.
Is a fun one to come back on. It is October as we're recording, so we'll be watching a fudge ton of horror movies, 31 of them to be precise. So far, actually 31. I mean, I'm a day behind at the moment because it was my kid's birthday on the weekend, so I got a double dip to catch up. But so far, let me have a look here. I think 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of the movies that I've watched so far have been sequels. I'm getting sequel deep this
I reckon
spooky season.
Oh geez, I'm not gonna. Oh geez, I don't think our podcast has time for me to go through my choices, but yeah, I feel like I've watched a few sequels as well, because it was sequels of horror movies I'd never really watched before and I never had a huge desire, and it's like, oh yeah, I'll watch that. So, and I'm gonna watch The Grudge 2, the Japanese version, tonight. So
super spooky.
That follows on from The Grudge that I watched.
Ju-on.
Yeah, Ju-on.
Sick. Well, look, we're both pumping through sequels this month, so we'll be back on mic.
Oh, have you watched Hostel? Actually, have you watched Hostel 3?
No.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. But I didn't hate it. I was like, this is almost like a straight to video. I can't remember it coming out.
I'm pretty sure it is a straight to video one.
Yeah, but set in Vegas instead of some Eastern.
Okay, that's a fun setting.
Eastern European bloc. But yeah, the same premise, same group of people that like to maim and torture. But the thing was, there was some things I sort of half predicted, but I think they they do a lot of good twists where you think you know what's going on, and then they twist it. You go, "Oh, you got me there." You know, you didn't necessarily fall into the cliches. So,
All right.
yeah, I thought, well, that's a good one just to tick off my list. Hostel 3, and yeah, there's The Ring 2. I never saw the American version of that. That's another one that I want to tick off. And then
I did see the American version Ring too. I didn't like it.
yeah, and then they're gonna. Well, there was another one a couple of years ago came out again that was The Rings.
Oh, Rings, yeah.
Yeah, so there's that too. But then I don't want to. I might have to watch The Ring again. I haven't watched that for a long time, so won't count that, and then count the other two. I don't know. Anyway, because there's rules. There's rules to this list too.
There's rules. Well, one of the rules is you can't watch more than 2 films from one series.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If I watch Ring 2, if I watch them all.
If you watch Ring 2 and Rings, okay, yeah, cool.
No, but even if I watch The Ring, I just don't count that. I just need that as a refresher to watch The Ring 2 and 3.
It's a bold man who watches extra movies in a 31 movie month challenge.
I know. It's all about time constraint, and that's where it is at. But anyway, on that note, I guess we're gonna say not all sequels suck, eh?
Fuck no, they don't. Sick. See you again soon, friends. Hey, sequel suck fans.
My definition alone, there are fewer films.
I almost sequel remake. Quick warning.
Sequels suck.
This episode is spoilers.
No.
Over.